Good evening, I'm David MUIR, and this is World News. Cheating the system, the tax scammers stealing billions of dollars from the government. Why is the IRS letting them get away with it? It's your money. With the tax deadline looming, the scammers stealing billions from the IRS. How the con man keeps beating the tax man. It is down to the wire for millions of Americans who've waited until this weekend to do their taxes. And while honest taxpayers are crunching numbers, a lot of others are busy cheating the system. The IRS estimates it gets shortchanged by almost $300 billion a year. Money the rest of us have to make up. Tonight, ABC's John Cochran on how the scammers keep pulling it off.
Go, 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 go.
Wars are expensive. They are now, and they were more than a century ago. To pay for the Spanish-American War, the government imposed a tax on long-distance calls from those newfangled telephones. The war ended quickly, but the tax remained. Last year, Washington finally killed it, offering refunds for all taxes collected after February 2003. But tax cheats figured out a way to get more than they should.
11%.
They're getting away with it, along with other tax scams, because the IRS claims it does not have enough agents to audit the returns. The IRS says even when it finds tax frauds, the Justice Department, overburdened with other cases, often refuses to prosecute. The government has not only failed to crack down on tax cheats, in some cases it has hired them. A few years ago, investigators discovered 27,000 defense contractors who owed back taxes on big profits they made on everything from catering food to providing services at military funerals. One contractor had not paid taxes for 10 years. He moved to a comfortable life in the Caribbean where he cannot be extradited.
The Pentagon now says it checks with the IRS to find out whether contractors have paid back taxes. But just when the IRS thought that problem was solved, more tax cheats showed up. This time, doctors and medical companies paid by Medicare.
Congressional investigators found that 21,000 doctors and companies paid by Medicare failed to pay $1.3 billion in taxes. And who has to make up for the taxes lost? Right, the honest taxpayer. John Cochran, ABC News, Washington.
Finally tonight, translating truth. Tomorrow, Israel will begin a series of solemn events memorializing the Holocaust. At the same time, a creative new effort to fight Holocaust deniers, those who say it didn't happen, is gaining momentum. It is all about speaking the language, literally, of one of the world's most high-profile Holocaust deniers. Here's ABC's Wilf Dinnick now.
In this basement office, tucked under Israel's Holocaust Museum, these old, powerful images are getting a brand new audience. A whole website in Farsi has been created for the people of Iran, laying out the history from the rise of Nazi power to the end of World War II. The museum wants to counter the threat of Iran's president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. He calls the Holocaust a myth and says he wants to wipe Israel off the map. Within 2 weeks of the site up and running, the people here at the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem say they've reached close to 10,000 people in Iran. Emails like these flooded in, expressing horror. One says, as an Iranian, I feel ashamed of my president's comments. Another says, my eyes are full of tears when I see my little daughter and remember this story. The hope here, the website will arm a new generation of Iranians with the facts to stand up to their leader who denies one of history's darkest moments. Wilf Dinnick, ABC News, Jerusalem.
And that is World News for this Saturday. I'm David MUIR. From all of us here at ABC News, thanks for watching. Have a good evening. Good night. World News. Terror plot foiled. New details echoing 9/11. Saudi officials now say the captured terrorists were training to fly civilian aircraft. Aftershocks. The hidden wounds of war. They survived the battlefield. Now thousands of veterans are struggling with post-traumatic stress, and doctors warn of a looming crisis. Tonight, we're going to take a closer look at painful, lasting wounds of war, the wounds of the mind that we don't see. The Veterans Administration says of more than 100,000 troops seeking care after coming home from Iraq or Afghanistan, 25% suffer from mental health problems. Researchers say it is a looming public health crisis, but for the veterans and their families across this country, the crisis is already here. Inside this Berkeley, California church, Iraq veterans and their families share their pain from the injuries we don't see. The soldiers who gather here say they found little comfort in a military culture that often overlooks the psychological trauma, the hidden injuries. Former Lance Corporal Jeremy Williams.
They had been badgering me. Oh, were you crazy from Iraq?
That anger, all part of post-traumatic stress disorder. It has been debilitating for Jeremy and his wife, Christina. The couple filed for divorce 3 times before they finally got this kind of help. Stephanie Pelkey's husband, Michael, was haunted by what he saw in Iraq. He couldn't get the images out of his mind. Pelkey believes the Army missed the red flags, and they were glaring. Chest pains, nightmares. He was so afraid, he slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. Michael Pelkey shot himself just 1 week after being diagnosed with PTSD by a therapist off base. Jeremy Williams was diagnosed by the military, but on this day, just the sight of a military helicopter was enough to bring it all back. And in both families, there is a toll on the children. And Stephanie had to take her 4-year-old son out of preschool. He was too aggressive toward other children.
What's going on?
In the meantime, both families find comfort in one another. Just 15 minutes from Stephanie.
It's a real relief to find people that you can identify with.
No, we did it on an act.
So brave of these families to share their pain. That is World News for this Saturday. I'm David MUIR. From all of us here at ABC News, have a good evening. Good night. And this is World News. Tonight we're going to take a closer look at growing concerns about the safety of imported food. Just yesterday, the government stopped 20 million chickens from going to market because their feed may have been tainted with melamine. That's the same chemical imported from China found in pet food that killed dogs and cats. As ABC's David Curley reports tonight, the vast majority of imported foods pass through U.S. ports unchecked.
They may not be pretty, but neither is the latest news about imported foods. Alabama and Mississippi have just banned the sale of some Chinese catfish after discovering illegal antibiotics in their flesh. U.S. catfish farmers have been undercut by imports, but officials say this is a matter of public safety.
The catfish ban and the massive recall of contaminated pet food has lifted the curtain on a dirty little secret. Food imports have skyrocketed recently, and very little, 1%, is actually inspected at U.S. ports and borders. And what is found is frightening.
In the past 6 months, inspectors turned back Chinese apple chips with an unsafe color additive, fresh ginger with pesticide, and dried mushrooms listed as filthy. And China wasn't even the biggest offender. From India, spinach with pesticide, salmonella in a ground spice, and crushed chilies with pesticides among hundreds of items refused entry. Even the Food and Drug Administration admits the pet food recall and the tainted Chinese wheat gluten have revealed weaknesses in its systems.
They've been reluctant to allow our inspectors to see their production facilities. That's unacceptable. If we're going to do trade with them and expand our trade, they have to play by our rules.
Experts say it's a simple choice.
Are we willing to pay more for our food and ensure safety, or are we just interested in the cheapest food that's available?
A question many Americans are just realizing they must answer. David Curley, ABC News, Washington.
Tonight on our series Going Green, air travel. It is the fastest growing source of greenhouse gases, but a major name in aviation, billionaire Sir Richard Branson, owner of Virgin Atlantic Airlines, is looking to change that. Branson made headlines recently when he turned to Boeing instead of Europe's Airbus to buy 15 new planes. The $2.8 billion deal meant plenty of green for Boeing, but it also involved a pledge to go green. That's because Branson is betting big on biofuels. In the last 25 years, the amount of jet fuel used in this country has more than doubled to more than 70 million gallons a day. It is expensive, and the vast majority of it comes from overseas. But Richard Branson is convinced it doesn't have to. He and Boeing are exploring biofuel. It is environmentally friendly, and they plan to conduct a test run with a 747 by the end of next year. It will certainly be a lot more high-tech than the drivers who've turned to vegetable oil, grease from French fries, to power their cars. GE engineers who design engines for Boeing are already testing a number of potential biofuel sources: corn, algae, switchgrass, even newspaper. And the Defense Department has already begun to experiment with alternative fuels as well. Just this December, pilots flew a B-52 bomber on synthetic fuel from natural gas. And though not green fuel, it is a giant first step by not relying on fuel from overseas. But there still are many hurdles for commercial aviation, chief among them finding a fuel that doesn't freeze at high altitude. Another obstacle, power. Can a biofuel alone provide enough? But with the rising cost of oil and the growing pressure to reduce carbon emissions, Branson says the industry has to do something. In Britain, airplane emissions have led to fiery public debate. Prince Charles was criticized after receiving an environmental award here in the States and flying here to get it. Aviation experts say Branson's goal of flying a commercial flight on biofuel in 2 years may be a reach. But they say at least he's reaching. And long before that test run, Branson's airline has already experimented with the idea of towing airplanes to the runway rather than burning fuel while waiting for them to taxi to the runway. Trials have already been conducted at London's Heathrow and Gatwick airports and in San Francisco as well. That is world news for this Saturday. I'm David MUIR. From all of us here at ABC News, thank you for watching. Have a good evening. Good night. Good evening, I'm David MUIR, and this is World News. The sushi craze. Demand is soaring, so is the price. $20,000 for one fish. Now one inventor is tired of diners getting a raw deal. And finally tonight, how the megabucks sushi business has spawned a new idea. People around the world are gobbling up raw fish at a record pace, leading to sushi sticker shock. Now one inventor who finds the price is hard to swallow says he might just have the solution. ABC's Mark Litke is in Tokyo.
The daily auction at Tokyo's main fish market. And as usual, prices are soaring. Just one of these bluefin tunas will easily fetch the price of a new car. This 350-pounder went for $20,000. No matter how you slice it, that's a lot to pay for a love of sushi.
At some Japanese sushi bars today, even the smallest morsel of toro, that's the prized belly of the tuna, even this can cost more than $50 a bite. Delicious, but that price, pretty hard to swallow.
And this is the problem. The world's population of bluefin tuna is shrinking dramatically, being fished, some fear, to the edge of extinction, just like the whales. The demand among Japanese is enormous. They consume about 80% of the world's catch, but they are no longer alone. Sushi is all the rage in the Americas, in Europe, even in the Middle East. Sushi may be in need of a savior. Which is what brought us here. At the foot of Japan's Mount Fuji, inside this unassuming warehouse, we found an ambitious project trying to breed the world's biggest tuna in tanks. The experimental program is the brainchild of Akito Yamamoto, a businessman with a passion for tuna. At any one time, he has about 15 fish in each of his 5 tanks, where the purest water from underground wells is kept flowing to mimic the ocean's currents. Around and around and around they go, and they are growing. Yamamoto says with larger tanks, they could reach 4 feet or about 100 pounds. And if it all works out, this method could be duplicated anywhere in the world. We could all have our tuna and eat it too, which I got to do, tasting an early sample of a Yamamoto crop. Delicious, to me anyway, but will farmed tuna ever pass muster with the notoriously fussy Japanese? No way, says this chef. Wild tuna is far better quality, the taste much sweeter. Most customers seem to agree, but if prices get much higher, he says he won't be able to afford it anyway. So Japan just may quietly root for Yamamoto to succeed in his tuna-raising quest, a quest to save the tuna of the sea. Or at least drive down that $20,000 per tuna price tag. Mark Litke, ABC News, Tokyo.
And that is World News for this Saturday. I'm David MUIR. From all of us here at ABC News, thanks for watching. Have a good evening. Good night. This is world news. TB threat. As one man touches off an international health scare, just how contagious was he? And how prepared are we for a drug-resistant form of TB? We take a closer look. And to a T, the amateur golfer who's on a streak even Tiger Woods couldn't match, hitting holes in one like they're going out of style. We're going to take a closer look tonight at the tuberculosis scare that caught most everyone's attention this week. Tonight, Andrew Speaker remains quarantined at a Denver hospital. In an exclusive interview with ABC News this week, Speaker repeatedly apologized to those he may have exposed to the extremely drug-resistant form of TB. But just how contagious was he? And are health authorities truly prepared to deal with this virulent form of TB now traveling the world? Andrew Speaker set off a firestorm this week after flying back to North America from Europe, even after the CDC told him he had the most virulent form of TB, what's called extremely drug-resistant tuberculosis. Dr. Neil Schluger specializes in tuberculosis at Columbia Medical Center in New York.
It is quite a debate. If you were in Italy and the CDC called you and said you need to stay there in a hospital, but you knew the best treatment was back here in Denver, would you go to those lengths to get back? Would you get on a plane?
I think we all want to try to get the best treatment. I certainly understand his desire to come back. What he might have been able to do is travel back more safely, get government transportation where fewer people might have been exposed.
But Speaker says the CDC wasn't willing to offer that. Federal authorities have said otherwise. Now the government has contacted more than 70 passengers who were on that flight. They are being tested. So far, none show symptoms.
You can understand all the attention and the outrage from the other passengers, but just how contagious do we think he is?
It seems likely that he's not very contagious. His wife apparently has not been infected with tuberculosis, and presumably she's had close contact with him for an extended period of time. Secondly, when he coughs up phlegm and it's examined under the microscope, we don't see a lot of TB germs in the phlegm, and that also is a sign that he's probably not very infectious.
And though relatively rare in the U.S., 13,000 cases a year, doctors say this case has put a new spotlight on TB, which is still a killer around the world. 8 million people have it. 2 million will die from it this year. And 450,000 have a drug-resistant form, a number that's growing. It's the kind of TB created when patients fail to take the full course of treatment, especially in the developing world, where authorities aren't equipped to monitor patients. Andrew Speaker suspects he might have caught it doing charity work in Vietnam, showing just how easily it can travel back to the U.S.
The world is a very small place, and undoubtedly there are people with tuberculosis who get on airplanes and go on trains and buses in all corners of the world every day, and we just don't know about it.
And Dr. Schluger points out the U.S. hasn't developed a new antibiotic for TB in nearly 40 years, saying drug companies can simply make more money off of other drugs. But he warns with drug-resistant TB on the rise around the world, this is not the time to be complacent. And when we come back tonight, tales of triumph, how U.S. troops have gone from injured to Iron Man. The U.S. has spent billions of dollars to protect soldiers in Iraq from makeshift bombs, the so-called IEDs. But the bomb makers are also getting more sophisticated, and the death toll continues to rise. The Pentagon reported just this week that IEDs now account for nearly 80% of all military deaths in Iraq. And for the soldiers who do survive these attacks, the road back can be so incredibly hard. ABC's Jonathan Carl tonight with some remarkable stories of resilience.
Good. Gunnery Sergeant Angel Barsanis is one of more than 600 veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars to lose a limb, or in his case, 2. The most amazing thing about this display, he nearly died last July when he was hit by an insurgent bomb in western Iraq. That was less than 11 months ago. Now he shows off some of the technology that can turn an amputee into a world-class athlete. Mike McNaughton has 2 different artificial legs. One for running, extremely light. It stores energy and acts like a spring. The other, heavier, uses artificial intelligence to help anticipate his movements. No one has inspired more of these amputees than Major Dave Roselle. This was the Humvee he was riding in Iraq when he lost his lower leg.
It was a tough day. Lost my command. You lost your command.
Yeah.
You lost your foot, too.
Yeah, I was at war. I was lucky to be alive.
Roselle not only recovered, he went on to run an Ironman triathlon and to go back to Iraq for another tour of duty, commanding a cavalry troop in combat.
This will be a curtain wall of glass.
Major Roselle is now working to build a new amputee athletic center at Walter Reed Army Hospital, dedicating his life to working with others who have lost what he has and more. People like Rich Ingram, who lost his arm in Iraq. He says Roselle approached him while he was still in the hospital with an audacious challenge.
I'm going to start doing triathlons.
And now, just 2 years after losing his arm, he is out in San Francisco training for his 7th triathlon. Jonathan Carl, ABC News, at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center.
Incredible determination. And we'll be right back. And finally tonight, playing golf to a tee. As anyone who's ever swung a club knows, the toughest thing to do is hit a hole-in-one. Plenty of very good players go a lifetime without one. But ABC's Brian Rooney has found a woman who seems to be landing more than her share and shattering some amazing odds along the way.
Jackie Gagne took up the game only 4 years ago when she retired to Palm Springs. She knows her place in the world of golf.
Average, really.
She made her first hole-in-one in 2005. She made one January 23rd, then another 4 days later, and more. She even had 2 in one round. In all, 13 holes-in-one since January. She has met skeptics.
Yeah, you hear things. And I go, come on, let's put some money.
Tiger Woods, by comparison, has made 18 holes-in-one in his life, only 1 on the PGA Tour. For an average golfer, the odds of getting a hole-in-one are generally believed to be about 5,000 to 1. The odds of doing it 13 times in 75 rounds of golf multiply out to 1 out of 14 million trillion. That's a 1 opposite a 14 with 30 zeros after it. A mathematician at Caltech says that with her statistical history, Gagne's odds are actually much better. But even so,
this is probably the most extraordinary athletic feat in terms of sheer odds that I've ever done a calculation for.
All holes-in-one have to be verified by witnesses. None of Jackie Gagne's aces has been captured on videotape, except one.
Well, that one's got a chance.
Ooh, it's in the cup!
It doesn't count because she was just hitting a few shots for a local television crew.
There it
but
is.
She did it again.
See, it does happen, and you're the first to get it on tape. Holy!
Now, what are the odds of that? Brian Rooney, ABC News, Palm Desert, California.
It's something. I'd like to just get it near the hole. That is World News for this Saturday. I'm David MUIR. From all of us here at ABC News, thank you for watching tonight. Have a good evening. Good night.